The champagne flute shattered against the concrete as Karen Whitmore watched through her pristine kitchen window, her manicured nails digging crescents into her palms. The new neighbor's children were laughing in what she considered her pool area. 20 years she'd ruled Millbrook Estates like a queen, but these people didn't know their place. Her trembling finger hovered over 911 as she crafted the perfect lie, never suspecting that in 18 minutes, her own security cameras would become the weapon that would destroy everything she'd built. Justice was coming for Karen Whitmore, and it had been recording the whole time. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook Estate's pristine sidewalks as Karen Whitmore adjusted her designer sunglasses and stepped onto her immaculate front porch. At 52, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon that hadn't moved in the decade since she'd perfected the style. The HOA clipboard clutched in her French manicured hands contained 17 violations she'd documented during her morning patrol. 17 infractions that would remind the residents of Millbrook exactly who maintained order in their little suburban paradise. "Mrs. Chen," Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Your roses are extending 3 inches beyond the property line. That's a clear violation of Section 4.2.7. Linda Chen, a soft-spoken pediatrician who worked night shifts at the county hospital, looked up from where she knelt beside her garden. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She'd only gotten home 2 hours ago after a 12-hour shift in the ER. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I haven't had time to—" The HOA doesn't recognize exhaustion as an excuse for non-compliance. Karen scribbled something on her clipboard with theatrical precision. $50 fine, due within 7 days. Linda's shoulders sagged, but she nodded wordlessly. Karen felt that familiar surge of satisfaction, the sweet taste of absolute authority that had sustained her through 20 years as Millbrook Estates' self-appointed guardian. She'd built this kingdom violation by violation, fine by fine, until every resident understood the natural order. Karen Whitmore made the rules, and everyone else followed them. Her BMW's leather seat welcomed her as she continued her rounds. Next stop, the Martinez house on Maple Drive, where she'd spotted Christmas lights still hanging in February. The fine would be substantial. Holiday decorations were strictly prohibited past January 15th. But as she rounded the corner onto Maple, her perfect morning exploded into chaos. A moving truck sat in the driveway of 1247 Maple Drive, the Henderson house. Karen's blood pressure spiked as she watched 2 young black children, maybe 8 and 10 years old, chasing each other around the truck while their parents directed the movers. She pulled over so abruptly her tires squealed against the curb. Hendersons had been model residents for 15 years. Quiet, compliant, never so much as a blade of grass out of place. But they'd moved to Florida last month, and Karen had assumed their replacement would be more suitable, more like the Hendersons themselves, apologetic, deferential, grateful for her guidance. These people were different. She could see it in the way the father, a tall man in his 30s with muscled forearms, directed the movers with easy confidence. The mother, beautiful and professional-looking despite her casual clothes, was laughing at something one of the children had said. They moved through their new space like they belonged there, like they owned it. That was Karen's first mistake, assuming ownership was about paperwork rather than presence. "Welcome to Millbrook Estates." Karen forced her most diplomatic smile as she approached the family. The clipboard remained visible in her left hand, a subtle reminder of her authority. "I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA President. I wanted to introduce myself and provide you with your welcome packet." The woman turned with a genuine smile that immediately set Karen on edge. "How thoughtful. I'm Maya Thompson, and this is my husband, David." She gestured to the tall man, who nodded politely. "And those tornadoes over there are Zoe and Marcus Thompson." Karen mentally filed the name alongside her growing list of concerns. I trust you've reviewed the HOA guidelines. There are quite a few regulations specific to family dwellings. David stepped closer to his wife, and Karen noticed his wedding ring, a simple gold band that somehow looked more substantial than her own 5-carat monstrosity. We've read through everything. Seems pretty straightforward. Straightforward? Yes, but enforcement can be complex. Karen's smile never wavered. For instance, children's outdoor activities are restricted to designated areas during specific hours. The community pool area, for example, has very strict usage guidelines. Maya raised an eyebrow. Usage guidelines for the pool? Oh, yes. Resident priority scheduling, noise ordinances, appropriate attire standards. It's all quite detailed. Karen gestured vaguely toward the back of the development where the community pool sparkled in the afternoon sun. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining certain standards. Something flickered across David's face, a tightening around his eyes that Karen might have recognized as warning if she'd been paying attention. But she was too focused on establishing dominance to notice the shift in the family's energy. Standards, Maya repeated slowly. Of course. Wonderful. Karen's voice climbed an octave. I'm sure you'll fit right in once you understand how things work here. Speaking of which, that moving truck will need to be gone by 6 p.m. sharp. Overnight parking of commercial vehicles is strictly prohibited. It's 2 in the afternoon, David said, which gives you 4 hours. Plenty of time. Karen consulted her clipboard dramatically. Also, I noticed some boxes on your front lawn. All personal property must be contained within the dwelling or garage areas. Another fine-worthy violation if left unaddressed. The children had stopped playing to listen, their young faces confused by the sudden tension crackling between the adults. Marcus, the older boy, moved instinctively closer to his mother. Mrs. Whitmore? Maya's voice remained perfectly level, but steel had entered her tone. We're in the middle of moving in. Surely there's some reasonable accommodation for... The HOA doesn't recognize moving status as an exemption from community standards. Karen had used this exact phrase hundreds of times over the years. It never failed to establish the proper hierarchy. Rules exist for a reason. David's laugh was sharp and utterly without humor. Right, rules. Karen sensed victory slipping away and doubled down. I can see this is overwhelming for you. Why don't I schedule a formal orientation meeting for tomorrow evening? 7 p.m., my house. I'll walk you through everything you need to know about living in Millbrook. That won't be necessary, Maya said. I really must insist. There are liability issues, insurance requirements, community standards that... Mrs. Whitmore. David's voice cut through her rehearsed speech like a knife through silk. Thank you for the welcome. We'll figure things out ourselves. The dismissal was polite, but absolute. Karen stood on the sidewalk, clipboard clutched to her chest, as the Thompson family turned away from her and back to their move. The children resumed their laughter. The movers continued their work. Life went on around her as if she were invisible. For the first time in 20 years, someone had said no to Karen Whitmore. She walked back to her BMW on unsteady legs, her mind already racing. The Thompsons would learn just like everyone else had learned. She'd start with small violations, grass height, mailbox positioning, garbage can placement, build up a paper trail. Make them understand that cooperation wasn't optional in Millbrook Estates, but as she sat in her car, watching the family work together to build their new life, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: doubt. Not about her authority, that was unquestionable, but about what would happen when that authority met someone who refused to acknowledge it. 3 days later, her doubt crystallized into fury when she spotted the Thompson children at the community pool. It was a Tuesday afternoon, traditionally the quietest time at the pool. Karen had been conducting her weekly inspection of the facilities when she heard the splashing and laughter. She rounded the corner of the pool house to find Zoe and Marcus Thompson playing in the shallow end while Maya read a book from one of the lounge chairs. "Excuse me!" Karen's voice echoed off the water. "Excuse me!" Maya looked up from her novel, some literary thing Karen didn't recognize. "Oh, hello, Mrs. Whitmore. What are you doing here?" "Reading. The kids are swimming." Maya's tone suggested she was explaining something obvious to someone slow. It's a beautiful day. This is Tuesday afternoon. Family pool time is restricted to weekends and evenings after 6 p.m. Karen consulted her clipboard, though she knew the regulations by heart. Weekday afternoon hours are reserved for adult. Lap swimming and senior activities. "I don't see any adults swimming laps," Maya observed. "Or seniors doing activities." "That's not the point. The schedule exists to prevent conflicts and maintain order." Maya closed her book and stood. She was taller than Karen had realized, and something in her posture suggested this conversation was about to go differently than Karen expected. "Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, we pay HOA fees just like everyone else. The pool is a community amenity. And unless there's someone here who actually needs..." Karen's voice trembled with manufactured urgency as she pressed the phone closer to her ear. Through her kitchen window, she could see David Thompson helping his children out of his sedan. Marcus carrying a soccer ball, Zoe clutching what looked like a school art project, a picture of suburban normalcy that Karen was about to shatter with surgical precision. "Ma'am, can you give me the address?" The dispatcher's voice was crisp, professional. 1247 Maple Drive, the Thompson house. Karen had practiced this moment in her mind dozens of times over the past day, every word calculated, every pause deliberate. "I heard a woman screaming and now there's..." Silence. The kind of silence that means something terrible has happened. "Are you able to see the residents now?" Karen shifted position at her window, noting how David was now unlocking his front door while the children ran ahead into the house. "Yes, I can see it. The man just came home from work. He looked agitated, angry. Oh God, what if she's..." "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. Officers are being dispatched. Can you tell me your name and relationship to the residents?" "Karen Whitmore. I'm the HOA president. I've been concerned about this family since they moved in." The lie flowed like honey, sweet and poisonous. "There have been signs, arguments. The children seem frightened sometimes." She watched through the window as Maya appeared in the doorway, greeting David with a kiss. The image of domestic violence Karen was painting bore no resemblance to the scene unfolding 50 yards away, but she'd learned long ago that perception mattered more than reality when dealing with authority figures. "What kind of signs, Mrs. Whitmore?" Raised voices. The woman, Maya, she's had bruises around her wrists. I tried to talk to her about community resources, but she became defensive, protective of him. Karen's voice caught with practiced emotion. "I should have called sooner. I should have..." "You did the right thing calling now. Officers will be there in approximately 4 minutes. Are you in a safe location?" "Yes, I'm in my own home across the street, but those poor children..." Karen let her voice trail off, allowing the dispatcher's imagination to fill in the horrific details. Through the window, she could see the Thompson family moving around their kitchen. David had loosened his tie and was helping Maya with what looked like dinner preparation while the children did homework at the kitchen table. It was achingly, perfectly normal. In 3 minutes, it would be chaos. "Mrs. Whitmore, the officers would like to speak with you when they arrive. Will you be available?" "Of course. Anything to help." Karen disconnected the call and moved away from the window. Phase 1 complete. Now came the delicate choreography of appearing helpful while ensuring the situation escalated exactly as she'd planned. She changed into her most respectable outfit, a navy blazer over pressed slacks that screamed concerned community leader, and applied just enough makeup to suggest she'd been crying. The mirror reflected back exactly what she intended, a woman torn apart by having to make an impossible decision for the greater good. The first police cruiser arrived in 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Karen timed it from her front porch, where she'd positioned herself with a cup of tea that would go untouched, but suggested she'd been too worried to do anything but wait and watch. Officer Janet Rodriguez stepped out of the cruiser just as a second patrol car pulled up behind her. Karen had dealt with Officer Rodriguez before: noise complaints, parking violations, the occasional drunk teenager. Rodriguez knew her as a reliable community ally, someone whose calls were always legitimate and whose information was always accurate. That reputation was about to pay dividends Karen hadn't even planned for. "Mrs. Whitmore." Rodriguez approached the porch with her partner, a younger officer Karen didn't recognize. "You called in a domestic disturbance?" "Yes. Thank God you're here." Karen's voice broke slightly. "I've been so worried. The screaming stopped about 10 minutes ago, and I haven't heard anything since." "Can you tell us exactly what you heard?" Karen had rehearsed this part until it was perfect. "It started around 4:30. A woman's voice, very distressed. She was saying stop and please, and then there was a loud crash, like furniture, falling over. After that, just silence." Officer Rodriguez made notes while her partner studied the Thompson house. "Have you had previous concerns about this family?" "I've tried to be supportive, but—" Karen twisted her hands together, the picture of reluctant disclosure. "Maya Thompson has shown up to community events with what looked like finger-shaped bruises around her upper arms. When I asked if everything was okay at home, she became very defensive, almost hostile. Did she ask for help or indicate she was in danger? Not directly. But you know how these situations work, Officer Rodriguez. The victims protect their abusers until it's too late." Karen's voice carried just the right note of worldly sadness. "I've been debating whether to call for weeks. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. But when I heard her screaming today..." The lie was beautiful in its completeness. Every detail supported the narrative. Every emotion rang true. Every hesitation suggested reluctant civic duty rather than malicious intent. Officer Rodriguez looked toward the Thompson house, where warm light spilled from the kitchen windows. "We'll need to do a welfare check. Standard procedure for domestic disturbance calls." "Of course. Would it help if I came with you? Maya might be more comfortable with a familiar face present." "That's not necessary, ma'am. We'll handle it from here." Karen watched from her porch as the two officers approached 1247 Maple Drive. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from guilt but from anticipation. She'd set the perfect trap, and now she got to watch it spring. Officer Rodriguez knocked on the front door, with authority but not aggression. The sound echoed across the quiet street, and Karen saw curtains twitch in neighboring windows. Perfect. The more witnesses to the Thompsons' humiliation, the better. David answered the door in his shirt sleeves, tie now completely removed. Even. From across the street, Karen could see his confusion shift to concern as Rodriguez displayed her badge. "Evening, sir. I'm Officer Rodriguez with Metro Police. We received a call about a disturbance at this address. Is everything all right here?" Disturbance?" David's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "What kind of disturbance?" "Domestic in nature." "Is your wife at home?" "Maya?" "Yes, she's in the kitchen. Officer, I'm not sure what—" "I'd like to speak with both of you, if that's possible." Karen felt a surge of satisfaction as David stepped aside to let the officers enter. Through the still-open door, she could hear Maya's voice, bright with the same confusion David had displayed. "Officers, is everything okay? Has something happened in the neighborhood?" Ma'am, we received a call about raised voices and possible violence at this address. I need to ask you both some questions. The conversation moved inside, but Karen could track its progress by watching the shadows move past the kitchen windows. She imagined Maya's shock, David's indignation, the children's growing fear as they realized their home was being invaded by suspicious strangers. This was where most families would crumble. The sheer humiliation of being investigated for domestic violence, the neighbors watching, the whispered conversations that would follow. Even if the police found nothing, which they wouldn't because there was nothing to find, the damage would be done. The Thompsons would understand that Millbrook Estates wasn't a place where they could live comfortably. They would sell and move somewhere more suitable. But after 20 minutes, instead of emerging with someone in handcuffs or at least properly chastened residents, Officer Rodriguez appeared at the Thompsons' front door, shaking hands with David. Maya stood beside him, one arm around each of her children, all of them looking more puzzled than frightened. Karen's confidence wavered as Rodriguez walked back across the street toward her porch. "Well?" Karen rose from her chair, teacup clutched in both hands. "Is she safe? Are the children?" "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask you some follow-up questions about your report." Something in Rodriguez's tone made Karen's stomach clench. This wasn't the voice of an officer grateful for community assistance. This was the voice of someone who'd found discrepancies. "Of course, anything I can do to help." "You reported hearing a woman screaming around 4:30 this afternoon, followed by sounds of furniture breaking?" "That's right. It was terrifying." "Ma'am, according to the family's phone records and neighbor confirmation, Mrs. Thompson was at the elementary school until 5:15 today for parent-teacher conferences. Mr. Thompson was at his office until 5:45. Both locations have been verified." The words hit Karen like ice water. She'd been so focused on creating the perfect lie that she'd forgotten to verify the basic facts that would support it. Maybe I was mistaken about the time. You also mentioned seeing bruises on Mrs. Thompson's arms during community events. Can you be more specific about when and where?" Karen's mind raced. She'd attended exactly 2 community events since the Thompsons had moved in, neither of which Maya had attended. "It might have been. I see her around the neighborhood, walking with the children." "Mrs. Whitmore." Rodriguez's voice carried a warning now. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense. I need you to think very carefully about your answers." "False report?" Karen's voice climbed an octave. "Officer Rodriguez." Karen didn't sleep that night. She paced her bedroom until 3 a.m., then sat at her kitchen table staring at the Thompson house across the street, watching for any sign of movement behind their curtains. The knowledge that they had recorded. Her conversation with Officer Rodriguez felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. By dawn, she'd consumed half a pot of coffee and developed a plan that felt like salvation and desperation in equal measure. If the Thompsons wanted to play with recordings, she'd show them what 20 years of HOA documentation could accomplish. Karen's home office occupied what had once been a formal dining room, its walls lined with filing cabinets containing meticulous records of every violation, fine, and enforcement action in Millbrook Estates history. She'd digitized most of it over the years, creating searchable databases that could produce damning patterns of behavior from the most seemingly innocent infractions. She pulled the Thompson file, already 3 inches thick despite their brief residency, and spread its contents across her mahogany desk. Pool violations, landscaping infractions, mailbox positioning discrepancies, garbage can placement issues. Individually, they were minor. Collectively, they painted a picture of residents who refused to respect community standards. But as Karen reviewed her documentation, a sick realization crept through her caffeine-addled brain. Every single violation was either completely fabricated or based on interpretations so creative they bordered on fantasy. The landscaping infractions were rose bushes that extended 3 inches past an arbitrary property line she'd drawn herself. The mailbox positioning discrepancies referred to a mailbox that was 6 inches to the left of where Karen thought it should be, despite no written regulation specifying exact placement. Worst of all, she'd been so focused on building a case against the Thompsons that she'd documented her own escalating harassment with obsessive detail. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 a.m., interrupting her spiral of panic. Karen peered through the peephole to find a young black woman in an expensive business suit standing on her porch, briefcase in hand. "Mrs. Whitmore?" The woman's voice carried through the door with professional authority. "My name is Jasmine Carter. I'm an attorney representing the Thompson family. I'd like to discuss some concerns my clients have about recent interactions with you." Karen's hands shook as she fumbled with the door locks. An attorney. The Thompsons had hired an attorney. "I don't understand," Karen said as she opened the door. "What kind of concerns?" Jasmine Carter was younger than Karen had expected, maybe 35, but she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from winning battles in courtrooms rather than suburban living rooms. Her smile was polite and utterly without warmth. "May I come in?" This conversation would be better conducted privately. Karen led her to the living room, noting how Carter's eyes cataloged every detail of the space. The pristine white furniture, the expensive artwork, the family photos that screamed upper-middle-class respectability. Karen had always been proud of her home's perfection, but under Carter's professional gaze, it felt like evidence of something pathological. "Mrs. Whitmore, my clients have asked me to address what appears to be a pattern of harassment that began the day they moved into Millbrook Estates." "Harassment?" Karen's voice cracked. "I've been enforcing HOA regulations. That's my job as president." Carter opened her briefcase and withdrew a tablet. "I'd like you to look at something." The screen showed security camera footage from the Thompsons' doorbell camera. Karen watched herself approaching their house on moving day, clipboard in hand, that first conversation playing out in perfect digital clarity. "Now listen carefully to what you say here," Carter narrated as Karen's recorded voice filled the room. "You mention maintaining certain standards when discussing pool usage. You emphasize the word certain in a way that suggests these standards are about more than facility maintenance." "That's not what I meant. Then there's this." Carter swiped to a different recording. Karen watching herself at the pool, voice echoing off the water as she demanded the Thompson children leave. "Notice how your voice changes when you're speaking to my clients versus when you're alone with their children. More aggressive, more threatening." Karen felt trapped in her own living room as Carter methodically presented evidence of every interaction she'd had with the Thompson family. The lawyer had somehow obtained additional footage from other residents' security systems, creating a comprehensive timeline of Karen's escalating harassment. The most concerning evidence, however, is this. Carter played the audio from Karen's conversation with Officer Rodriguez. Karen's own voice filled the room, speaking words that sounded even more damning in the clinical environment of legal review. "These people who just moved in and immediately started causing problems." That's a direct quote, "Mrs. Whitmore, I was upset. I didn't mean anything by combined with your attempts to manufacture evidence of domestic violence, your pattern of targeting this specific family for violations that don't appear in your enforcement records for other residents, and multiple witnesses who can testify to discriminatory language you've used in community meetings, we have a substantial case for civil rights violations." The words hit Karen like physical blows. Civil rights violations, federal charges, the kind of legal trouble that would destroy not just her HOA presidency, but her entire life. "What do you want?" she whispered. "My clients want to live peacefully, in their home, without harassment." They want you to stop manufacturing violations, stop attempting to restrict their use of community amenities, and stop involving law enforcement in fabricated emergencies. Karen's mind raced through possible responses, legal defenses, ways to minimize the damage, but Carter wasn't finished. They also want your resignation from the HOA board, effective immediately. My resignation? Karen shot to her feet. I've been president of this board for 20 years. This community depends on my leadership. This community depends on following actual regulations rather than arbitrary interpretations designed to harass residents you don't approve of. You can't force me to resign. The board would have to vote. Carter's smile turned predatory. Mrs. Whitmore, let me be very clear about your situation. We have documented evidence of you filing false police reports, attempting to manufacture evidence of domestic violence, and engaging in discriminatory enforcement of community regulations. Any one of these issues could result in criminal charges. Karen sank back into her chair as the full scope of her legal exposure became clear. However, Carter continued, my clients are reasonable people. They don't want to destroy your life. They just want to live in peace. So here's what's going to happen. Carter withdrew a document from her briefcase. This is a resignation letter. From all HOA positions, an agreement to cease all contact with my clients, and a commitment to sell your property and relocate outside Millbrook Estates within 6 months. Sell my house? Karen's voice was barely a whisper. This is my home. I built this community. You've systematically abused your authority to harass a family based on racial prejudice. The legal consequences of that abuse include the very real possibility of federal civil rights charges that could result in significant prison time. Karen stared at the document, her 20-year kingdom dissolving into legal jargon and ultimatums. If I sign this, the criminal charges go away? My clients have no interest in pursuing criminal charges if this situation is resolved amicably. But Mrs. Whitmore, this is not a negotiation. If you don't sign this agreement today, we file federal civil rights complaints tomorrow morning. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Karen could hear the wall clock ticking, marking off the seconds of her old life disappearing forever. I need time to think. No, Carter's voice cut through Karen's plea like steel. You had time to think before you decided to file false police reports. You had time to think before you decided to target my clients with fabricated violations. You had time to think before you decided to use your position of authority to make their lives miserable because of the color of their skin. That's not why... Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed your enforcement records for the past 5 years. In that time, you've issued over 300 violation notices to residents. 97% of those notices were issued to minority residents, despite minorities making up only 30% of Millbrook's population. The statistical impossibility of that disparity makes your motivations crystal clear. Karen felt the walls of her perfect life closing in around her. She'd been so careful, so methodical in her enforcement. She'd never realized someone could analyze the data and reveal the patterns she'd worked so hard to disguise. If I sign this, she said finally, how do I know you won't pursue charges anyway? Carter's expression softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with something that might have been pity. Mrs. Whitmore, my clients are good people who want to raise their children in a safe, peaceful community. They don't want revenge. They want justice. Those are two very different things. Karen reached for the pen Carter offered, her hand trembling, as she signed away 20 years of power with 4 strokes of ink. There's one more thing, Carter said as she collected the signed documents. The HOA board meets tonight to address W. The Millbrook Estates Community Center had never felt smaller. Karen entered to find every seat occupied and residents standing along the walls, the largest turnout in the HOA's history. The usual board table at the front of the room had been expanded to accommodate additional chairs, including one marked with a placard reading Legal Observer, where Jasmine Carter sat with her briefcase open and a digital recorder visible on the table. Robert Chen called the meeting to order with uncharacteristic formality. This emergency session of the Millbrook Estates Homeowners Association Board is convened to address serious allegations regarding administrative conduct and potential violation of federal fair housing laws. Karen took her usual seat at the board table, but the familiar position of authority felt like sitting in the defendant's chair. To her left sat board members she'd handpicked over the years, people who'd never questioned her decisions, never challenged her interpretations of community regulations. Tonight, none of them would meet her eyes. "Before we begin," Robert continued, "I want to acknowledge that we have several residents present who have requested to address the board regarding their experiences with HOA enforcement procedures." Linda Chen stood first. The pediatrician Karen had fined that very morning for rose bushes, extending 3 inches past an imaginary property line, looked exhausted, but determined. "I've lived in Millbrook for 8 years, Linda began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "In that time, I've received 23 violation notices from Mrs. Whitmore. 23. My neighbor directly across the street, Mr. Patterson, has received 0 violations in the same period, despite having identical landscaping violations that I've photographed and dated." She held up a thick folder. "I've documented every interaction with Mrs. Whitmore, including instances where she's appeared at my home after my night shifts to demand immediate correction of violations that don't exist in the written HOA guidelines." Karen felt compelled to respond. "Dr. Chen, your property has consistently failed to meet community landscaping standards." "Which standards?" Linda's voice sharpened with professional authority. "I've read every page of the HOA regulations. There is no specification for rose bush placement relative to property lines. There is no regulation about garden edging height. There is no rule about the types of flowers allowed in residential landscaping. The standards are based on community precedent and aesthetic consistency." "Aesthetic consistency?" Linda laughed bitterly. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Patterson's yard has been overrun with dandelions for 3 years. His fence is falling down. His mailbox is held up with duct tape. But somehow, my roses are the threat to community standards?" Murmurs rippled through the room as other residents recognized their own experiences in Linda's testimony. Karen saw heads nodding, people pulling out their own phones to document the proceedings. "Dr. Chen," Robert Chen interjected gently, "do you have specific documentation of these disparities?" Linda opened her folder and withdrew a stack of photographs. "These were taken last weekend. Mr. Patterson's property on the left, my property on the right. I'll let the board decide which one fails to meet aesthetic standards." The photographs passed among the board members, and Karen watched their expressions shift from uncomfortable neutrality to obvious dismay. Patterson's yard looked like a suburban wasteland, while Linda's was meticulously maintained despite the microscopic violations Karen had cited. "Furthermore," Linda continued, "I've compared notes with other residents who've experienced similar enforcement disparities. The pattern is clear and statistically impossible to explain through coincidence." Jasmine Carter stood. "If I may, Dr. Chen has provided documentation that will be part of a comprehensive analysis we're prepared to present tonight." Carter approached the board table with a laptop and projection remote. "With the board's permission, I'd like to present statistical evidence that supports Dr. Chen's allegations." Robert nodded, and the community center's old projection screen flickered to life, with a spreadsheet that made Karen's blood turn to ice. "This analysis covers HOA violation notices issued between 2020 and 2025, Carter explained as the data populated the screen. During this period, Mrs. Whitmore issued 347 violation notices to Millbrook residents. The spreadsheet broke down violations by resident name, address, type of violation, and resolution status. But the column that made Karen want to vomit was labeled Resident Demographics. Of the 347 violations issued, 312 were issued to residents identified as racial or ethnic minorities, despite these residents comprising only 31% of Millbrook's population. Gasps echoed through the room. Karen had never seen her enforcement patterns laid out with such brutal mathematical clarity. The statistical probability of this disparity occurring through random chance is less than 1 in 10 million, Carter continued. But the pattern becomes even more clear when we examine the types of violations. The next slide showed violation categories. Landscaping and aesthetic violations account for 89% of all notices issued to minority residents, compared to 23% for white residents. Furthermore, photographic evidence shows that identical violations by white residents went unaddressed during the same time periods. Karen tried to interrupt. These statistics don't account for the actual condition of properties. Mrs. Whitmore, we have extensive photographic documentation of identical violations that were ignored when committed by white residents and aggressively pursued when committed by minority residents. Carter's voice cut through Karen's protest like a blade. Would you like me to show those comparisons? That won't be necessary, Robert said quickly. The board treasurer looked sick. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have a response to this data? Karen's mind raced through 20 years of carefully constructed justifications, but under the harsh light of mathematical analysis, every excuse sounded hollow. HOA enforcement requires subjective judgment about community standards. Subjective judgment that consistently targets residents based on race is called discrimination, Maya Thompson said from the audience. It was the first time Maya had spoken during the meeting, and her voice carried the weight of someone who'd endured Karen's harassment firsthand. She stood slowly, and the room fell silent. Mrs. Whitmore, the day we moved to Millbrook, you came to our house and told us we needed to understand how things work here. You emphasized the importance of maintaining certain standards. You scheduled a mandatory orientation meeting to teach us about community norms. Maya's voice remained calm, but her words carried the force of absolute truth. None of our white neighbors received mandatory orientations. None of them were told they needed to understand how things work. You treated us like invaders who needed to be controlled from the moment we arrived. That's not true, Karen protested weakly. I provide orientations to all new residents. Mrs. Whitmore, Carter interrupted. We've interviewed every family that moved to Millbrook in the past 3 years. The Thompsons were the only family offered a mandatory orientation. They were also the only family visited on their moving day with immediate violation threats. The evidence was crushing Karen like a physical weight. She looked around the room and saw 20 years of carefully maintained authority crumbling in real time. Robert cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, given the severity of these allegations and the statistical evidence presented, the board needs to address your continued service as HOA president. I've already submitted my resignation, Karen said quietly. When? Robert's surprise was obvious. This morning, to Ms. Carter. Carter nodded. Mrs. Whitmore signed a comprehensive agreement acknowledging the discriminatory nature of her enforcement patterns and agreeing to resign all HOA positions immediately. Well, Robert said, clearly relieved to avoid a formal removal vote, that addresses the immediate governance issue. But it doesn't address accountability, said a voice from the back of the room. Karen turned to see Carlos Martinez standing near the door. She'd cited his family for Christmas decorations that had remained up past her arbitrary deadline, the same decorations that hung on 6 other houses without consequence. My family has lived in this community for 12 years, Carlos said as he walked toward the front of the room. 12 years of being treated like second-class residents by a woman who decided we didn't belong here the day we moved in. He stopped directly in front of Karen's chair. My children ask me why the HOA lady hates us. What am I supposed to tell them? That some people think brown families don't deserve to live in nice neighborhoods? Karen wanted to protest, to explain, that she'd never intended harm, that she'd been trying to maintain community standards for everyone's benefit. But looking at Carlos Martinez's face, seeing the pain her actions had caused his children, the words died in her throat. The financial impact of your harassment extends beyond the violation fines, Carlos continued. We've had to hire landscaping companies to meet your fabricated standards. We've paid attorney fees to challenge bogus violations. We've lost time from work dealing with your manufactured emergencies. Furthermore, Carter added, the psychological impact on these families, particularly the children, constitutes additional damages that could be pursued through civil litigation. The room fell silent as the full scope of Karen's misconduct became clear. She hadn't just Viola. Karen woke to the sound of her phone ringing at 6:47 a.m. The caller ID showed her sister Janet's number, and something in the persistent urgency of the rings made Karen's stomach clench with dread. Janet? It's early. Karen, what the hell have you done? The panic in her sister's voice was immediate and sharp. Janet lived 3 states away in Ohio, far from the insular world of Millbrook Estates. For her to be calling at dawn meant something had escaped Karen's carefully contained suburban kingdom. I don't know what you mean. YouTube, Karen, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you're everywhere. Karen's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? There's a video, multiple videos, of you harassing that family, lying to police, screaming at children at a pool. It's gone viral, completely viral. 3 million views and climbing. Karen stumbled to her laptop, her hands shaking as she opened a browser. She didn't need to search. Her name was auto-completing in the search bar, suggesting she'd already become a trending topic. The first result made her legs give out. Pool-Invading Karen. Called the cops with lies. Now she's HOA-banned until 2030. The video had been posted to a channel called Suburban Justice Stories and had accumulated 3.2 million views in 12 hours. The thumbnail showed a freeze frame of Karen pointing an accusatory finger at Maya Thompson while the children cowered behind their mother. Karen clicked play with trembling fingers. The video opened with security camera footage from the Thompsons' pool encounter, but it had been professionally edited with dramatic music and text overlays highlighting Karen's most inflammatory statements. Her voice echoed through her laptop speakers with crystal clarity. Excessive noise can disturb residents who work from home or maintain alternative schedules. Pool privileges suspended pending a formal review of community compliance standards. These people who just moved in and immediately started causing problems. But the editor hadn't stopped with pool footage. Someone, and Karen suspected Maya Thompson, had provided years' worth of security camera recordings showing Karen's harassment campaign in devastating detail. The video showed her taking photographs of imaginary violations, measuring rose bushes with a ruler, confronting residents in their driveways with increasingly aggressive body language. The audio from her false 911 call played over footage of the Thompson family peacefully eating dinner together, creating a split-screen nightmare that made Karen's lies impossibly stark. I heard a woman screaming, and now there's silence. The kind of silence that means something terrible has happened. The video showed David Thompson helping Zoe with homework while Maya prepared vegetables at the kitchen counter, a scene of domestic normalcy that made Karen's fabricated violence report look not just false, but pathologically malicious. But the most damaging segment came at the end. Footage from last night's HOA meeting. Someone had live-streamed the entire proceeding, capturing Karen's humiliation in real time. The statistical presentation of her discriminatory enforcement, the resident testimonies, her tearful apology, all of it preserved forever in digital amber. The video ended with a title card. Karen Whitmore, banned from HOA leadership until 2030. Currently under investigation for civil rights violations and filing false police reports. The comments section was a tsunami of outrage. This woman literally tried to get a black father arrested for domestic violence with zero evidence. Absolutely disgusting. 20 years of this harassment? How did nobody stop her sooner? The way she talks to those children. Someone needs to check her basement for bodies. Update. Found her LinkedIn. She works for Morrison Insurance. Time to make some phone calls. That last comment made Karen's heart stop. She frantically opened LinkedIn to find her professional profile flooded with comments and messages. Her employer had been tagged hundreds of times, with users demanding her immediate termination. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Morrison Insurance, HR. Karen? The voice belonged to Patricia Monroe, the HR director. We need you to come in immediately. Patricia, I can explain. Karen, our switchboard has been flooded with calls since 6 a.m. Our corporate social media accounts are being bombarded with demands for your termination. There's a video circulating that shows you engaging in what appears to be systematic racial harassment. Karen's professional life was disintegrating in real time. That video doesn't show the full context. Karen, you filed a false police report alleging domestic violence against a client family. You've been caught on camera engaging in discriminatory enforcement of housing regulations. You've been civilly banned from HOA leadership for civil rights violations. Patricia's voice was ice-cold professional. What context could possibly make this acceptable? I need time to consult with an attorney. Karen, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building to collect your personal items. Don't come in today. We'll have your belongings shipped to your home address. The line went dead. Karen stared at her laptop screen as the view count continued climbing. 3.4 million, 3.5 million, 3.6 million. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications as the video spread across every social media platform. She opened Facebook to find that someone had created a page called Millbrook Karen Watch, dedicated to tracking her public appearances and ensuring she faced consequences for her actions. The page already had 50,000 followers and growing. Twitter was worse. Millbrook Karen was trending nationally, with users sharing the video alongside commentary about systemic racism in suburban communities. Her address had been posted and reposted, along with her phone number, employer information, and even her vehicle license plate number. Someone had found her high school yearbook photo and was circulating it with the caption, "Evil doesn't age, it just gets more expensive shoes." The doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m., making Karen jump like she'd been electrocuted. She peered through the peephole to find a young man with a camera and microphone standing on her porch, with a news van parked in her driveway. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jake Martinez from Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your response to allegations of racial harassment and filing false police reports." Karen pressed her back against the door, heart hammering. Local news had picked up the story. Her 15 minutes of internet infamy had evolved into legitimate media coverage. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Urgent. J. Carter." Karen opened her laptop to find an email from Jasmine Carter with the subject line, "Time-sensitive legal matter." "Mrs. Whitmore, the video documenting your harassment of my clients has generated significant public attention. This attention has brought additional evidence to light, including security footage from multiple residents that documents your discriminatory enforcement patterns over several years. More importantly, the public response has attracted the attention of federal civil rights investigators. The Department of Housing and Urban Development has opened a preliminary investigation into potential Fair Housing Act violations. Additionally, multiple residents have contacted our office expressing interest in joining a class action lawsuit for damages related to discriminatory harassment. I strongly recommend you retain criminal defense counsel immediately. The viral nature of this incident has made prosecutorial discretion regarding your false police report much less likely. We still honor our agreement regarding criminal charges from my clients, but we cannot control federal investigations or other residents' decisions to pursue legal remedies. J. Carter. Karen felt her world tilting off its axis. Federal investigation, class action lawsuit, criminal defense attorney. The carefully contained suburban drama had exploded into a national scandal that could destroy her life completely. The doorbell rang again, followed by knocking that sounded like more reporters. Karen crept to her bedroom window and peered through the blinds to see 3 news vans parked on her street, with reporters doing stand-up broadcasts from her front lawn. Her phone rang constantly now, reporters, lawyers, activists, internet, trolls who'd somehow obtained her personal number. She turned it off, but her landline immediately started ringing. Karen unplugged every phone in the house and closed all the blinds, but she could still hear the commotion outside. Neighbors were giving interviews, reporters were knocking on doors, and someone was filming everything for what would undoubtedly become part 2 of her viral humiliation. By noon, the video had reached 7 million views. Someone had created a Wikipedia page titled Karen Whitmore HOA Controversy with a detailed timeline of events and links to legal documents. Her high school and college alumni associations had posted statements distancing themselves from her actions. Most devastating of all, someone had found and posted her parents' obituaries, along with a fundraising page for a scholarship fund at the elementary school where her mother had taught for 30 years. The comments on that page were particularly brutal. Imagine dedicating your life to educating children of all backgrounds, only to have your daughter grow up to terrorize minority families for sport. Mrs. Whitmore would be ashamed of what her daughter became. The apple fell so far from the tree it landed in a different orchard. Karen realized she was crying again. Not from shame this time, but from the crushing weight of consequences she'd never imagined possible. Her harassment of the Thompson family had been contained